time checking in. So happy you could join us this morning for Sunday Morning Zen. Wanted to just make a shout out really fast to all the many of you who have upgraded your memberships over the last several weeks. It's really a great outpouring of support. We really appreciate it. Several people here, Tatiana and Sarah, and it's just been, again, overwhelming, the level of support. So if you're a member, thank you very much for your membership. We'd appreciate it if you consider upgrading your membership. If you're not a member, please come join us. There's a lot of great things happening here at the center, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. This morning's speaker, I would need probably a scroll that reached several links down the block if I were going to talk about all the things that she's done for ZLMC since she's been here, I think 2010, which is the year I took Jukai. So Christine has been a circle steward for the Women's Circle. She's been on the board of directors. She's facilitated lining up all the Sunday Morning Zen speakers for over a year now. She's a close personal confidant for anything I'm considering doing, and she's a special projects director. Anytime we've got something going on that we need somebody to help put together that requires a lot of action over time is where Christine is at. She has a past degree, she has an undergraduate degree in social welfare from Aurora University, and she worked in the human resources profession for about 25 years, and always excited to have her when she comes to speak. She'll be speaking this morning about Resolve to Begin yet again. Thank you. Thanks so much, Christine.
Gosh, it's good to see everybody. It's so good to see everybody's names. There's a lot of names on the screen, and that's good to see, and I'm happy to be here with those of you who are in person. It's been a while since I've given a talk, and I found myself actually looking forward to it, and that will come out a little bit as I speak this morning. So I've been, as Michael said, I've been a member here since 2010, and that's so about 12 years. And before that, I did not meditate. This was 12 years ago was my introduction into Eastern Buddhist philosophy and teachings and into meditation. But since I've been a member for 12 years, I have meditated pretty regularly. So that's 12 years of meditation. And you might think that that would mean that it's pretty much just integrated into my life now. Doing 12 years of anything, it sort of becomes part of your life. And that's true to an extent. It is, for the most part, something that's just part of my life now. I can't really imagine not sitting. I can't really imagine not having a spiritual practice. But even so, I do have times where I need to check in, renew my practice, and reconnect with my intention and recommit to the discipline. So that's where the title comes from for my talk today, Resolve to Begin, parentheses, again, because it's not something that I commit to just one time. It comes up for me again and again that I have to renew that aspiration. Because let's face it, in the short term, it can be easier to put it off. Whether I'm talking about using spiritual practices in my day-to-day life, or whether I'm talking about literally sitting, doing the meditation, it's just easier sometimes to just put it off. And even after having a solid practice, it can still be easy to get pulled off center, be distracted, get stale, or just go rote. Just have sort of a routine practice where, yeah, I sit, but there isn't much aliveness to it. So, so each of us have arrived here to your spiritual practice, whatever it may be, through some pathway. Mine was twofold. My engagement in a traditional Christian practice had waned, and yet I had always been interested in Eastern thought, and here was an opportunity not more than a mile from my home, so why not explore it? I literally live less than a mile from the Zen Center, excuse me, which is my great fortune. So that was one of my motivations. But the other motivation that really got me here was that I was going through a really rough patch in my life, my personal life. And I was grasping for something that would reduce my anxiety, my stress, and that's what really motivated me to get here. So I know each of you have your own path for getting here. Yours may be similar or different, but in some way it was motivating to get you into these rooms. For me, when I was going through that rough patch in my life, it didn't feel like it would ever end. You know, that's how it is. When you're in the midst of something, it feels like, oh my God, this is my new homeostasis. This is my new way that my life is going to be. But of course, like all life situations, like all life stresses, it too ebbed over time. And I got back to a little bit more calm point in my life. And I could have easily drifted away from this new spiritual practice when that happened, because that's another thing that can happen to a lot of us, is that when things are tough, we're gung-ho, we're going to do something about it. And then when things get a little easier for us again, then we don't have quite the motivation that we did before. You know, we go back to our default behaviors. But fortunately for me, by the time my life situation had moderated and I felt a little calmer in my life, I had taken the foundation series, which Michael just talked about. I had started sitting regularly. I had started reading and studying Buddhism, and I had started engaging with Sangha members. And I had started experiencing the positive impact of the practice in my life. And when I thought about the practice to begin with, I will be honest, I really thought that just meditating was the practice. I didn't really get yet that the practice is so much more than that. It's what I do off the cushion. It's the way I direct my attention. It's how I interact with other people. It's the studying I do. It's the connecting with other people in the Sangha that I do. All of those are practices. And I started experiencing the joy of the fellowship of the Sangha, of belonging to something larger than myself. And I found the Buddhist teachings and practices fascinating. But to go back to that, the joy of fellowship in the Sangha, till I came here, I didn't really realize that that was something that was missing in my life. I had good friends, I had good family members, I had good relationships with my family members, but it was different than being part of a fellowship that is about a spiritual practice. That was really important, and it was missing in my life. So I feel like I was one of the lucky ones that I got hooked, and I started experiencing subtle shifts in my day-to-day life. I was less reactive. I was able to see the opportunity of taking a pause to situations in my life, to relationships in my life. And I was able to catch myself dwelling or obsessing about the past or about the future, and make a different choice about where to put my attention. So all that is great. And you feel like when you get on that track that it's just going to continue. You know, you're just going to be able to stay steady and solid on engaging in your practices on a regular basis. And your life is all going to be good. But of course, that's not the way it happens. Life comes along, you encounter obstacles. And my obstacles could be during a specific meditation period, like it could have been today, just while I was sitting there, I could have had obstacles that come up. It could be related to my meditation practice in general. For example, I've noticed in the past that there are periods of time where I let my frequency of meditation slip a little bit, right? Or I'm reducing the time of my meditation practice. And it just happens very subtly, very almost beyond your consciousness, but you just are like, oh, today I really can only sit for, you know, X number of minutes rather than Y number of minutes. And then the next day that might happen again. Or it could be that I find an obstacle related to my spiritual practice in general, because I might get distracted by a particularly busy period at work. Now, I'm not working anymore, I'm retired, but when I was working, that was a big excuse for me. You know, I had to get to work, or I had to do this. It was just a busy period in my life, and so I didn't have time to devote to spiritual practices. Or I go on vacation. I personally, I tend to drop my meditation during vacation. You know, I can say to myself, well, I'm usually out in nature, so I'm kind of doing a different kind of meditation practice, but still, it's just very interesting to me that this little simple practice that I absolutely have time for on vacation drops. Or there are times when my interest in my ongoing spiritual practice, it just goes stale. It just goes dormant. It doesn't engage me in the same way for whatever reason. So during these times, you know, when I lose that energy and I lose my engagement, my practices are just much less vibrant in my life. And I'm just really curious, am I the only one? Do other people experience this? Okay. Okay, so in the room, I'm getting nods and yeses. And Robin, okay, online is saying yes, that happens. Earl is saying yes. Those of you who are not showing your faces, I'm going to assume at least 2 or 3 of you are nodding your heads, you know. And you know, I probably shouldn't call these obstacles. It's just normal life, right? Just like everything else, our spiritual practice is impermanent. It is going to have ebbs and flows, and the path that we're on, we'll experience in our spiritual life, it's not never-endingly upward and expansive. We're going to experience troughs, but we just keep going, right? It's important for us to recognize that this is happening, but we just keep going. At those points, I say to myself, using today's parlance, we need a booster. We need some sort of way to renew our discipline in our spiritual practice, not in a harsh way. Like the last thing we need to do is say, what is wrong with me? You know, or to judge ourselves. I can't believe I'm no longer sitting. Those aren't really helpful. What we need to do is some way to sort of reconnect us with our aspirations, reconnect us with what brought us here initially, and what our hopes and intentions are for what our spiritual practice can bring us. Because we can get caught up in the practice of it without necessarily always reminding ourselves of why are we here? The Bodhisattva vow that we chant at the end of our sitting on Sundays, right? That's why we're here, to free all beings from suffering. So I wanted to share with you just a couple of things that help me connect with my aspirations. And I was thinking about, I don't really know the full metaphor, but you know, there's that metaphor about teachings are pointing to the moon. They're not the moon itself. There's that in Buddhism. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah. So these are things for me that help me they point to my aspirations and help me reconnect. There's many others, but I just want to share a couple of quotes with you, and then one other practice. So I found this quote in a daily meditation that was actually from a Franciscan priest that I read. His name is Richard Rohr, and he writes a daily meditation, or a daily little short essay, and in this short daily meditation, it referenced something that had been written by a Christian theologian, like maybe in the 15 or 1600s. And I don't know why, it just captured me. It captured what it is I'm trying to do with my spiritual practice. And the quote goes, I want to be more loving in my heart. It is often easy to have the idea in mind, the plan to be more loving. To see it with my mind and give assent to the thought of being loving, this is crystal clear. But I want to be more loving in my heart. I must feel like loving. I must ease the tension in my heart that ejects the sharp barb, the stinging word. I want to be more loving in my heart, that with unconscious awareness and deliberate intent, I shall be a kind, a gracious human being. I forgot to capture the name of the person who said this, but I have this now on my desk at home so that I read it regularly. There was something about those words, I want to be more loving in my heart. You know, again, not just in my thinking, but literally that it comes from a place in me that I can act on it. So this is one of those things that keeps me connected to my aspirations. Another one, boy, if you want to read some great, great quotes that'll help you, Google Joanna Macy, which I'm sure many of you have heard of her. She says she's a Zen teacher, and she's very connected with the environmental movement, okay? So she says, the biggest gift you can give is to be absolutely present. And when you're worrying about whether you're hopeful or you're hopeless, or you're pessimistic or you're optimistic, who cares? The main thing is that you're showing up, that you're here, and that you're finding ever more capacity to love this world, because it will not be healed without that. Showing up is what's going to unleash our intelligence and our ingenuity and our solidarity for healing our world. She has another quote that I found too that I thought I can't have so many, but you know, she had that same sort of tonality again about who cares? Like, don't get inside your head so much. Just act, just stay connected, just be present. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then the last thing I wanted to just mention, and I believe I've mentioned it before in a talk, but it had such impact to me. About 3 or 4 years ago, I heard one of our members, Steve Parker, who's a therapist here in Oak Park, give a talk at the Oak Park Library. And the title of the talk was about more peaceful families. He was giving a talk about how you have relationships that are more peaceful in your family. And he said, one of the biggest things we need to do in our relationships, and I extend it to just my spiritual practice generally, is that we need to remember to live by principle, not emotions. Typically, when I'm actively engaged with, when I'm not actively engaged with my spiritual practice, I'm going to default to living emotionally. And by that, I mean reactively, self-centeredly. It's when we act from our emotions, we're often very judgmental, reactive. We don't give a lot of thought to what we're doing. I'm not at all saying that emotions are bad. They are not. We need them to live. They're important to our life. But we want them to inform how we behave, not drive how we behave. We don't necessarily want our emotions to lead us. We want to be aware of them and then decide how best to deal with them. So those are just two quotes and a principle that I use to kind of help ground me and reconnect me to, why am I doing this? Why is this important to my life? My aspiration is to be a bodhisattva, to live in the present with an open heart from a place of wisdom and compassion towards myself, towards others, and towards the physical world that we live in. So when I recognize that my spiritual practice needs a refresh, what do? I reconnect with those aspirations. I do a Sunday morning Zen talk, because that helps to really get you to study again and realize why you're here. I might commit to sitting more regularly, maybe more minutes, more days. In a particular meditation, I might decide that I'm going to pay attention to something differently instead of just my breath. I might pay attention to my feet on the floor, the feel of my back on the chair. I might shift and pay attention to sound rather than my breath. So I move things around a little bit. Maybe I'll have a conversation with someone about my spiritual practice. Or I'll pick up a book that spoke to me. The thing is that I have to recognize that I'm kind of in a trough and take some action to help me re-engage. How about you guys? What do you guys do when you get into a spiritual trough? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Any practices you use? Oh. So you start reading more, studying more, picking up a lion's roar and connecting with it. Yeah, exactly. So think about it. Think about what you do and how you can do it intentionally. I want to shift just a little bit now. So I've been talking a lot about myself. And that's my personal story about what happens for me. But I want to share a little bit with you from a Buddhist approach about resolving to begin. And I want to share with you from this book, Training in Compassion by Norman Fisher, which some of you are very familiar with, I'm sure. I have read this book multiple times, and it always gives me something new. And it's a Zen teachings on the practice of Lojong. Lojong is a Tibetan practice from the 12th century. And essentially, it's a compilation of 59 slogans, aphorisms, pithy short statements for generating compassion and resilience. So they're practices. Think paramitas, think the precepts, things that help us live a life of compassion and wisdom. So the 59 slogans are organized into 7 main headings. So there's 7 main headings, and then under them are a certain number of slogans that come up. I'm going to focus on just one main heading, but let me just read the main headings to you so you get a sense of what we're talking about here. So the first main heading is resolve to begin, which is the one I'm going to talk about. Then there is train in empathy and compassion. The third one is transform bad circumstances into the path. The fourth is make practice your whole life. The fifth is assess and extend. The sixth is be responsible in relationships. And the seventh is live with ease in a crazy world. Now, of course, these are Norman Fisher's interpretations of 12th century. I don't know if in the 12th century they said live with ease in a crazy world, but that's his interpretation of the headings. And just to give you a sense of some of the short, pithy slogans underneath. So underneath, transform bad practices into the path. That's one of the headings. One of the slogans is be grateful to everyone, right? Think about that just for a second. You can tell how difficult that might be, right? Another one is whatever you meet is the path. Under be responsible in relationships, one of the slogans is don't figure others out. Don't malign others. Don't unload on everyone. Live with ease in a crazy world. Don't be swayed by circumstances. Be wholehearted. So that's just a couple of examples of the kinds of slogans that are part of Lojong and that he goes through in this book in a really engaging and fun way to read. So I want to start with, as I said, or not start with, but I want to just talk today about resolve to begin. And I can't, in some places, I can't say it better than Norman Fisher, so I'm going to read a little bit from his book. But under the heading "Resolve to Begin," there's only one slogan. There's only one of those pithy statements out of the 59. And it's train in the preliminaries, or train in the foundations. And it's all about finding the motivation to commit to a spiritual path, because you got to find that motivation and you got to commit to a spiritual path before any of the rest of these slogans you're going to be willing to take them into your life. So there's 3 approaches in train in the preliminaries, and I'm going to go through them. Each approach is essentially a recognition that a decision is needed, a serious intention. So the first approach for training in the preliminaries so that you can take the spiritual path into your life, in this approach, the preliminaries include everything that's happened to you in your life up to now, including the tough and difficult challenges. And so let me just read a little bit about what he says. He says, this training has to do with owning all that has happened to you as the stuff of your present life. Train in the preliminaries is to stop moaning and feeling sorry for yourself, and to recognize instead that regardless of what has happened or why, this is your life, and you are the only one equipped to deal with it. And then, based on that sense of personal responsibility, training in the preliminaries involves reflecting on your life so that you can develop the resolve and courage to begin a new life path. It's the process of looking honestly at your life and making a firm decision to embark on a disciplined spiritual path. The point is that you begin by marking a pause in your life, a time when you say to yourself, the old path is no good anymore. I have come to the end of it. I need to take the time now to review my life so that I can find the motivation to go ahead differently. So I call that one the "how's that working for you" approach. Looking back on your life and seeing, the approaches that you're using and that most of us use over and over and over again, despite the evidence that shows us that they either don't work or they bring us suffering, we keep using them. This is about look at that and say, for goodness sake, let me try a different path. So that's the first approach in training in the preliminaries. The second approach, which I call the just do it approach, he says, in this approach, the preliminaries include, in this approach, you make a decision and commitment to practice Zazen in a disciplined way, committed way, daily sitting and participating in retreats on a regular basis. And you trust that sitting regularly with your breathing and the feeling of your body will provide the spiritual inspiration and the force necessary to set a new process in your life. So you can see why I call it the do it, just do it. It's like, you don't think about it, you just say, I'm just gonna start sitting and hope and trust, not hope, that it will provide the motivation to change my life. Because remember, the spiritual life isn't about changing the outside of your life. It's about changing our relationship to ourselves. It's about changing our relationship to others and to the world. So it's not about things that are out here being different. That's why it's so tough and why we have to have such a commitment and such a discipline, because it's about looking at ourselves and changing. So the third approach is a practice with a set of 4 traditional reflections. And the idea is that if I take these 4 reflections seriously, really reflect and contemplate them, it will change my outlook on life, and I will have found the motivation to begin a spiritual path. So here are the statements to reflect on, and he encourages people to reflect on them by studying them, reading them again, writing about them, talking about them. And I'm going to read the 4 statements, and then I'll go back and share just briefly on each of them. So the first statement that you're asked to reflect on is the rarity and preciousness of human life. The second statement is the absolute inevitability of death. The third is the awesome and indelible power of our actions. And the fourth is the inescapability of suffering. So the rarity and preciousness of human life. He says, the earth may contain 7 billion or so humans, but it also contains many other living creatures. For instance, every human body is host to trillions of living beings. The number of ants alone is larger than 7 billion, not to mention all the other sorts of insects and other animals. If you consider then the total number of non-human living beings on the earth and to the number of human beings, you would certainly see that human life on earth is a very rare thing indeed. It's not only rare, it's precious. It's no exaggeration to say that human life is precious and sacred and not to be taken lightly. And it is also, in the grand scheme of things, as I just said, unbelievably rare. Having received this rare and precious gift, each of us have received this rare and precious gift of a human life. How is it that up to now, we haven't thought about the best and highest way of fulfilling our human purpose? That we haven't resolved to go beyond your self-centeredness and self-concern so that you can begin to manifest wisdom and compassion? Considering deeply the preciousness of human life, you can feel inspired to begin to do something more with your life. So that's the first reflection. The second one, not quite as pleasurable to consider, but the absolute inevitability of death. And he says, I'm saying that he says it, but of course, again, this is a deep, long tradition. We really have a hard time wrapping our heads around the fact that we are going to die. We know it in our heads, we kind of know it, but we just don't feel it in our body. We don't live our life in that way. I'm not suggesting that we should, but the fact is that we never know when death is going to come, and that we probably have less time left than we think. So that we need to recognize that we're in an urgent situation, and it's important that we turn our attention to what is important right now, that we don't waste time. So this statement asks us to turn our reflection to, are we putting things off? Are we putting a spiritual path off? Are we till some future date when things get a little bit easier to deal with in our life? But if we reflect on the absolute inevitability of death, we'll see that it's important that we do something for our spiritual life now. The third, the awesome and indelible power of our actions. All of our thoughts, words, and deeds have consequences. We may never know the full measure of these results or consequences, though they are extensive and powerful. So reading from his book, most of us think of ourselves as rather inconsequential people. We don't take our own power very seriously, but this is not so. The actions, thoughts, and words of each of us are important. All of us together are making the world. So we have to ask ourselves, how am I living? What kind of actions am I taking? Am I a force for good in the world, or am I just another person doing nothing to help? And if we ask these questions seriously, we will have to conclude that we can do much, much better, and that we have to do better, that there is no excuse not to, and that to do better is an urgent necessity. I try to remember this one, even if I am thinking thoughts that are cynical and they never come out of my mouth, they pollute my own thinking. They condition my own mind. And so it's important to remember the awesome and indelible power of our thoughts, words, and actions. And a spiritual practice will help us with that, right? It'll help us. And then finally, the inescapability of suffering. No one can avoid suffering or unsatisfactoriness in life. Given that this is so, how can we not make a serious effort to develop wisdom, compassion, and resilience? How can we not prepare our minds and hearts for the inevitable suffering that we are going to be facing someday? Why then would we not think to guard and strengthen our mind and heart to cope with the suffering that certainly will be coming in some measure at some time? With this reflection, we'll realize that the only adequate response to the sober realities of our life is some form of spiritual practice. So I consider this last approach of these 4 statements, these 4 reflections, sort of like it's no joke approach. This life is no joke. We really have to take it more seriously and recognize the truth of these statements, and then that can help provide the motivation for us to stay connected to a spiritual practice. So these training in the preliminaries are practice to help you get motivated to establish a spiritual practice, but I think you can probably see that they're really useful along the way too, right? I certainly find them, I've read them multiple times, and each time I read them, I think about how it helps me stay connected. So having an engaged and vibrant spiritual life is not an end state. It's not a place that we get to. It's a lifelong practice that has ebbs and flows, and I find it's important for me to recognize that so I don't lose heart and I don't get discouraged, and that I need to be flexible and creative in finding my own ways to keep my practice alive. And that's what I have to share this morning. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
So if anybody has comments or questions, yesterday in our Saturday morning commit to sit, we do check-in, and this actually kind of came up as a topic. Christian, who's online, was talking about the fact that he's doing something in his day-to-day sitting right now that sort of, I said, wow, that's like renewing your practice, it's renewing your commitment. I don't know, Kristen, do you want to share what you've been doing?
Yeah. So something I've been, so every time I feel stuck with my practice, what I try to do is to just go back to the basics. And so as someone that's been meditating for a few years now, I always find it beneficial to sort of think about what meditation is like again, for like almost like for the first time. So recently what I've been doing is reading a few books and just really focusing on things like posture and the breath, which I think sometimes when we've been meditating for some time, we sort of forget about those things. And I've actually noticed that when I pay closer attention to this, I notice that the practice becomes very difficult. So that's just something that I've been experimenting with lately, is just really holding myself accountable to my practice and finding ways to I guess push myself a little bit past my comfort zone, because I think sometimes my practice just feels way too comfortable, and it just seems like I don't know, like it just seems too effortless. And usually when things feel that way for me, it's a sign that, I'm probably doing something wrong, or I don't know. So yeah, that's just something that's been on my mind lately that I've been playing with.
Thanks. And as I said, even yesterday, I just think that when we adjust our meditation practices like that, it makes them more alive. Like if they're not rote, then we're actually injecting something which brings us to be more present. And certainly what you're doing, you have to be present to have, be doing your posture different or paying attention to your breathing. And I think that that's a really good example of what the small things we can do. So. Yeah, let me get you a microphone.
I could volunteer. One huge thing for me, biggest thing in the last few years was I read The Mind Illuminated by Kuladasa or John Yates, if you're familiar. Anyway, he had this wonderful, I don't know, something about the way he wrote about meditation allowed me to see. He says, meditation should be fun. You should enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to be regular. And it opened for me a realization about what a kind of should I was carrying about like my internalized parent, my internalized Zen master, just saying, you need to effing meditate, boy. And while that may be true, that when I can connect to the joy of practice, I want to do it myself. I spontaneously want to do it. So I would ask myself, like, have I turned this into a chore? Have I turned this into something I need to do because I'm bad? And that's been liberating for me. It's not bulletproof. I think there are natural like seasons that come and go too, but that's just been huge for me.
Yeah, I love that, and because it's two things. I mean, you talked about, you picked up a book and you started reading somebody else, so studying. And then the other piece that I really hear in there is curiosity. When you started asking yourself, have I made meditation a chore? You're being curious, you're being open to having something else emerge, which I also love. Thanks.
Hi.
Hey, Dave.
Hi. Two simple things I do, and I've been meditating a long time, and I've been doing these two simple things a long time, and they've both kind of been alluded to already, but and Bill just said, making meditation more fun, or that's what. Two things that really enhance my meditation and always have are meditating in a group. You only need one other person in the room. There's a different quality present when there's more than just Dave. There's a different energy. It's almost, so this morning I felt that very strongly because COVID kind of wiped out a lot of that meditating in the presence of others, right? I do that much, much, much less the last 2 years because of COVID. And that joyful quietude came back to me very strongly because I was meditating with you guys today. And the other thing has already been alluded to, but it's so true and powerful for me is just to meditate in nature, in the beauty that this world offers. And by the way, as my practice progresses, I see more beauty in more places, just that I didn't see it before. But for example, I go to Morton Arboretum, where my wife and I are a member there. I'm married to a meditator, and boy, that'll help your practice. Marriage alone will help your practice. Out of need, maybe. And we'll just wander, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. If you've never been there, oh my God, go check it out. You can drive, you can get there in 20 minutes. And we just walk, and they have 1,700 acres, and there's streams, there's a little pond, there's a lake. We wait for a physical place in this of beauty to call to us, to me, by a stream, say. And I love meditating by this, where you can hear the water rippling, or on the shore of a lake where you can hear the waves lapping against the shore. Those are two of the things that just enhance the joy and the pleasure of the actual meditating experience. And we just sit for, it helps tremendously when um, you know, I can, and then it just seems conducive to deepening. And because of meditating in nature and meditating in groups, it reinforces the times when it's alone and less fun and in my kitchen instead of, you know,
Those are
in the
great.
presence of nature. So
Thank you. Those are great ideas too. Tanya.
So in the last bit that you mentioned, talking about sort of preparation for suffering that is upcoming, that to me is an interesting thing. So I like to sort of sit on the edge of the two different points of view. One point of view is, if I'm practicing, I will be more resilient, I will evade the suffering. And then understanding that that is complete garbage and that suffering is coming no matter what. So it is this sort of acceptance of the situation, the despair without despair, that is helping me to sort of put my, I don't know, like fingers into meditation. It helps me to sit in it. So yeah.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, we have the fantasy that somehow that we can evade that suffering, right? And, but you know, the fact of is that hopefully with meditation, we can change our relationship with it in some way so that in fact, we can deal with it better. But I like that idea of that edge that you're talking about. So, thanks. Great, well, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, giving me this opportunity for me to reconnect with my own aspirations about my spiritual practice, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. It was a wonderful talk,
Thanks,
as
Robin.
always.